Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. The news business is like a never-stopping treadmill. There's no concept of a weekend or a break, and we saw this again this weekend. Conflicts were coming to a boil. An unrelenting China targeting Taiwan, a reckless Russia driving Ukraine to the brink of nuclear disaster, and a violent flare-up in West Asia. Rockets flew between Gaza and Israel. The Iron Dome deflected missiles and saved Israelis, but the Palestinians paid the price for this escalation. Multiple deaths were reported, including children. It's the same tragic story repeating on loop in this part of the world, a conflict that the world is tired of, a conflict that is no more a political priority for any power bloc. So every once in a while it flares up. There are casualties and condemnation, and a fragile truce holds until another missile is fired. This weekend, the hostilities could have escalated into another war. On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you a lowdown. It really was a tense weekend. An actual war in Europe, the threat of a war in the Indo-Pacific, and a deadly flare-up in West Asia. Israel and Gaza came very close to another full-blown war. They exchanged fire for 3 days. They flattened buildings. They killed innocent civilians. But now there is a fragile ceasefire in place. How exactly did things escalate so fast? The first shot was fired by Israel on Friday. They claim it was preemptive. Terror groups were plotting attacks on Israel, so they acted first. And who did they target? Taysir al-Jabri. He's a senior commander of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Now, some quick background. The PIJ, or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, was founded in 1981. It was one of the two major militant groups operating, one of the two major militant groups operating in Gaza. The other is Hamas. Their ideology, very similar to most Palestinian militant groups. They deny the existence of Israel. Their goal is to create an Islamic Palestinian state in West Asia. And who funds them? Iran. The Islamic Jihad gets most of their weapons and money from Iran. In fact, their top leader was in Tehran on Saturday. He was meeting President Ibrahim Raisi when Israeli rockets pounded Gaza. Were they on target? Well, some of them were. The PIJ commander was killed in the airstrike, but some of the projectiles also hit civilian buildings. At least 10 people were killed. Among them was a 5-year-old child. Israel's caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid announced the military operation. He said he was not interested in a broader campaign.
The action in Gaza today was in the face of concrete threats that disrupted the routine of life in the south. Israel is not interested in a broad campaign in Gaza, but neither is it afraid of it.
Maybe Lapid was hoping for a targeted strike. But these things have a way of spiraling out of control, and that's what happened over the weekend. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad responded with force. They fired 1,100 rockets from Gaza. 1,100. 200 of them landed inside their own territory. The rest were shot down by Israel's Iron Dome. Now, we keep talking about the Iron Dome during every Israeli conflict, and there's a reason for that. The Iron Dome success rate was 97% this weekend. Only 3% of the rockets escaped. And that is ruthless efficiency for any military equipment. Some of the rockets did reach the outskirts of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Their residents were herded indoors by air raid sirens. Take a look at how that played out. It was supposed to be a normal weekend on the beach. Instead, those people were running for their lives. At least they had the Iron Dome to protect them. Because of it, Israel reported 0 casualties during this conflict. 0. Compare that to the situation in Gaza. 44 people were killed in 3 days and 300 plus injured, many of them civilians. Gaza's health ministry says 15 children were among the victims.
I was at my grandfather's house when suddenly the rubble started to fall on all of us. We started screaming and the neighbors came to rescue us. I was reciting the last prayers. I didn't expect to live until the moment they rescued me.
And that was a 9-year-old girl in Gaza. She was not a terror mastermind. She was not involved with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but she was caught in the middle of this madness. And like I said, it's almost like a never-ending cycle. Islamists threaten Israel's right to exist. Israel responds with disproportionate force, and dozens of Palestinians end up paying the price. Now, this may sound hard to believe, but this conflict could have spiraled into something a lot worse, possibly a full-blown war. Let me show you some pictures. Israel was deploying artillery and tanks to the border. They were prepared for an escalation, for a much longer conflict. Just last year, remember, Israel and Gaza had fought a war. 11 days of non-stop fighting. More than 250 people died in that war. We very nearly saw a repeat this weekend, but thankfully both sides agreed to a ceasefire on Sunday. It was mediated by Egypt. It came into effect at 8:30 p.m. GMT. So does that mean that war has been averted? Well, not yet. Ceasefires between Palestine and Israel are extremely delicate. All it takes is one provocation or one miscalculation. In fact, that very nearly happened. Israel fired a couple of missiles into Gaza after the truce was announced. They claim it was retaliation for earlier strikes. Well, whatever the justification, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad did not respond. So right now there is a fragile peace. Both sides have already started claiming victory. The PIJ says the truce has left them stronger.
The enemy aimed to break Islamic Jihad, but we didn't break. On the contrary, we made an achievement and we forced the conditions that we started the battle for with the enemy. This is how simple the deal was, and the achievement is clear.
And it sums up the problem in this conflict. Leaders who don't care about the people involved. Imagine if Hamas had gotten involved in this fight, or if Israel had decided to escalate further, the death toll would have been much higher. But leaders on both sides do not seem to care. In fact, they benefit from such short-term conflicts. Let me explain how this works. Israel is led by caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid. His military credentials are yet to be proven. And in Israel, that's a big factor. Israelis like prime ministers with military experience. And in the month of November this year, the country is electing a new government. So what does Lapid do? Embark on this unnecessary escalation. Same with the Islamic Jihad. They sense that Hamas is not as strong as before. They sense that there is an opening in Gaza. So what do? They plot more attacks against Israel. And it's always the residents who end up paying the price. This is what Gaza looks like after 3 days of fighting. Buildings cut in half, homes and apartments flattened, hospitals overstretched. And for what? To make a macho political statement. That's all there is to it. Israel has begun easing the blockade on Gaza. Food and fuel trucks have started shuttling again. So hopefully the humanitarian crisis can be contained. A lot depends, though, on the international community. So far, the response was focused on the conflict. The US, Europe, Russia, they all urged restraint from both sides. Iran, Turkey and the Arab League condemned Israel's actions. Now, if this truce holds, the international community must increase aid missions. As for the long-term solution, I'm afraid there's no magic spell. As long as terror groups dominate the Palestinian narrative, as long as Israeli leaders politicize the idea of self-defense, as long as world powers decide to manage instead of resolve the Palestinian crisis, such flare-ups will continue. Thankfully, the tensions in Gaza are easing for now, but that's not the case around Taiwan. Chinese aggression is now being called the new normal there. The situation is getting worse. China is simulating an attack on the island.
Sailing in these waters so close to the treasure island of our motherland, we are deeply aware of our great responsibility and glorious mission. Now, the morale of all officers and soldiers on board the ship is high. Upon receiving the order, we will definitely fulfill our mission.
What mission are they on? The mission to take Taiwan. The PLA held bombing drills yesterday. Dozens of Chinese jets were dispatched. They flew close to Taiwan. What is their mission? To practice bombing raids and missile attacks on Taiwan. Last week, Beijing began a campaign to punish Taiwan. This is after U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taipei. China's response was a series of targeted military operations. They were supposed to have ended by now, but they haven't. China has decided to extend its military drills.
We will firmly safeguard China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, resolutely contain the U.S. efforts to use Taiwan to suppress China, and firmly smash the Taiwan authorities' illusion of gaining independence through the U.S. At the same time, China is also upholding international law and the basic norms of international relations, stipulated in the UN Charter of Non-Interference in Internal Affairs.
So what is China up to? More military provocations. The PLA's Eastern Theatre Command has issued a statement. This is the theatre that is responsible for Taiwan. So what did their statement say? The PLA will conduct more joint drills in the coming days. The focus is on two areas: anti-submarine operations and sea assault operations. Where will these drills happen? China has not shared the details. For how long will these drills continue? Again, silence from Beijing. So for now, the PLA will stay in the Taiwan Strait. That's all that we know. It has encircled the island. China has militarized the waters around Taiwan. And now they're going beyond Taiwan. The PLA is also conducting drills near the Korean Peninsula. They're happening in the Yellow and the Bohai Seas. This permanent presence is a signal for the U.S. The PLA is telling American forces to stay away. China says Taiwan is a Chinese province and not an independent country. And it has vowed to take this island by force if necessary. But the U.S. has a pact with Taiwan. The U.S. has promised to come to Taiwan's defense if China attacks. And Nancy Pelosi's visit was meant to underline that commitment. It has resulted in an escalation. The PLA now has a big presence around Taiwan. Taipei has released some numbers. It says China has sent at least 14 warships and 66 aircraft. They were involved in naval and air exercises, and there were rockets too. The PLA has fired at least 11 ballistic missiles so far. This is China's largest ever military drill around Taiwan, and Beijing is not done yet. It has come dangerously close to Taiwan. Chinese soldiers have crossed the median line several times. What is the median line? It is the unofficial sea border between Taiwan and China. The PLA is crossing it and Taiwan is concerned.
Here is the median line in the Taiwan Strait. The median line of the strait is a tacit agreement between the two sides of the strait that has existed since the 1950s. Although this is of no effect under international law, the existence of this line is a fact. Every area of the no-navigation zones announced by China is to the east of the Strait median line. This action has squeezed Taiwan's military drill space and affected the normal commercial operation of international flying routes.
So Beijing is squeezing Taiwan. How is Taipei responding? By upping its defenses. Taiwan's military has issued an alert. Taiwanese ships have been deployed to protect the island. They've also activated a missile system. The world is watching and making dire predictions. The U.S. says China could use force. This is Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State.
And that's why we say that the change to the status quo that's prevailed with regard to Taiwan for more than 40 years is coming from Beijing, not from the United States or anyone else. That status quo is founded on something that was clearly understood for decades, and that is the differences between Taiwan and the mainland need to be resolved peacefully. And what we've seen China do over the last few years is move away from a peaceful resolution of differences to doing so coercively and potentially forcefully.
China is moving towards the use of force, says Antony Blinken. The sudden death of a high-ranking official in Taipei has added to the tensions. This is Yang Li-sing. He was a leading weapons developer for Taiwan. He was found dead in a hotel room yesterday. Yang was in southern Taiwan. Over the years, he has overseen the development of various kinds of missiles. So his death, especially at a time like this, has raised concerns, but the local police have ruled out foul play. They say it was a heart attack. The next few days will be critical. China has extended the drills indefinitely. This could force the US to respond, and that may not end well. I'm sorry. Fresh war clouds are looming over Europe too. Russia could launch a military operation soon, a new military operation. Threats are being issued. People are receiving bomb threats almost every day. And I'm not talking about Ukraine. I'm talking about its neighbor, Moldova. Since the war began in Ukraine, Moldova has been worried. It fears that Russian troops could march into their country, and this threat was ignited by a leak. Belarusian leader and Putin's ally, Alexander Lukashenko, had committed a blunder. He accidentally revealed what looked like Moscow's plans for the Ukraine war.
Атомная станция – это страшнее ядерного оружия. Торем-2, которые мы новые закупили, называют точки. Они, наверное, не секретные для натовцев, они все видят. Мы поставим С-400, который будет находиться чуть западнее Минска. 1000 раненых прибыли в Гомель. Кричат наши беглые и прочее. Атомная станция.
Now let's look at that video closely. What is Lukashenko pointing at? It shows Ukraine divided into 4 regions. That is the obvious part. Now let's freeze that frame. What else is on that map? If you look carefully, you'll see Moldova. And this is from the month of March. So according to this map, more than 4 months back, Russia could have been thinking about invading Moldova, to take Odessa in Ukraine first, and from there launch an invasion into Moldova. Is this about to happen now? Russian forces are barely 45 kilometers west of Odessa, and Moldova is afraid. Its deputy prime minister says its country could be dragged into Russia's war. His name is Oleg Serebryan, and I have a statement with me. This is the deputy prime minister of Moldova. He says, the war in Ukraine means we worry that this is not simply a declaration but a kind of prelude to an operation in Moldova. We will do anything to avoid military confrontation, but it does not 100% depend on Chisinau. Chisinau is the capital of Moldova. The Russian threat is real. Through the summer, Moldova has received more than 100 bomb threats. You heard that right. More than 100 bomb threats. Almost all important landmarks were targeted. An international airport, the parliament and government buildings, the Supreme Court of Moldova, commercial centers, hospitals, even churches around the country. Thankfully, these were all false alarms, but alarms nonetheless. Who was behind them? Moldova suspects Russia, but it has not been able to establish that. Now, why is this country a target? Moldova, you see, was earlier part of the Soviet Union. It is sandwiched between Ukraine and Romania. Moldova gained independence in 1991, but it was not a smooth transition. The collapse of the Soviet Union triggered a conflict in Moldova. Moldovans fought pro-Russian separatists in Transnistria. This is a region that runs along Moldova's border with Ukraine. Transnistria declared its independence from Moldova in 1990. It functions like a separate state. Moldovan authorities have no control over this region. But the world still recognizes this thin strip of land as a part of Moldova. Transnistria could determine the future of this country. About 500,000 people live here. Russian is the official language of the region. Russian troops are also present here. They have been since the 1990s. How many troops? At least 1,000, according to one report. And these Russian troops are called peacekeepers. So Transnistria is under Russia's grip. In the past, Moldova did try to reintegrate the region, but those efforts have failed. And now, with Ukraine under attack and the Russians advancing, Moldova is worried. It fears this breakaway region could be a launch pad for Russian forces. And it's a legitimate fear, you could say. We've already shown you Russia's alleged war plans, and we have more. And in the month of April, a Russian military commander spoke about Moldova, about how a Russian invasion of Moldova could play out. The commander suggested the operation could start in southern Ukraine. Russian forces there could create a corridor till Transnistria, and from there they could march into Moldova. That's what he suggested. Now, if that happens, how will Moldova defend itself? It doesn't have the firepower. It has a small military force, just 6,500 soldiers. They won't be able to fend off a Russian military offensive. So the only option for survival is international support. Moldova has applied to become a member of the European Union. Just like Ukraine, it has a candidate status, meaning its application is being seriously considered.
Moldova has firmly decided to move forward on the path of European integration. The candidate country status gives Moldova hope that despite the unprecedented challenges we are currently facing, we can modernize the country, and we will also have the support of the European community in this process, the European Union being the most successful peace project in our history so far.
And this might not be enough. I'll give you two reasons why. Number one, an EU membership might help the Moldovan economy, but there's no guarantee of defense support. And number two, it takes years for Brussels to admit new members. Just ask Ukraine. It has been trying for years, but it took a Russian invasion for the EU to take Ukraine seriously. Moldova needs serious support to fend off a Russian attack, and it needs it now. The question is, will the West help? The clock is ticking. Moldova's fears stem from the fate of Ukraine, a country devastated by war and now staring at a possible nuclear disaster. The risk is mounting by the day. Russia has seized at least 2 Ukrainian nuclear plants, and its troops are now advancing to claim a third. This is Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russian troops captured it in the month of March this year. And 4 months on, it remains a battleground, a site of intense military activity. I'll tell you what happened here last week. Explosions rang out at this facility on Friday. Some units of the plant were damaged. After military projectiles, accusations were fired. Moscow and Kiev blamed each other for heightening the risk. Then on Saturday, rockets were fired. They struck a dry storage facility, they damaged containers with processed fuel and broke 3 radiation monitoring detectors. Now, these are basically machines that warn of nuclear leakage, hence the name, radiation monitoring detectors. Now they're broken. Ukraine says this will make the timely detection of radiation leak impossible. It says a catastrophe was miraculously avoided this time, but such miracles cannot last forever. So who was behind these attacks? Ukraine blames Russian troops. It says the attack was deliberate and aimed at wreaking havoc on Europe. Russia, of course, does not agree. It has blamed Ukrainian troops, accusing them of trying to frame Russia. Listen to this.
Today, the occupiers created another very dangerous situation for all in Europe. They shelled the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and have done it twice in a day. This is the largest nuclear station on our continent, and any shelling is an overt, blatant crime, a terrorist act. Russia has to bear the responsibility just for creating a threat to the nuclear power plant.
Ukrainian units of the 44th Artillery Brigade shelled the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant from near Marhanets on the opposite bank of Kakhovka Reservoir. Ukrainian shelling damaged Kakhovskaya high-voltage line, which supplied electricity to Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions. A power surge occurred at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, causing smoke in the plant's open switchgear.
These are nuclear reactors we're talking about. This is very dangerous territory, the last place to fight a war. Zaporizhzhia is a nuclear plant, and it's not just another nuclear plant. It is the largest plant of its kind in Europe. It contains over 2,000 tons of high-level spent fuel. Out of this, 855 tons is vulnerable spent fuel, meaning if the plant's electricity grid fails and there's no active cooling, this spent radioactive fuel could overheat, evaporate, and eventually start leaking. Russia knows this. Ukraine knows this. Yet they chose to fight in the vicinity of this plant. This is reckless and dangerous, not just for these two countries, but for the rest of the world too. The United Nations chief is calling their actions suicidal.
Any attack to a nuclear plant is a suicidal thing, and I hope that those attacks will end. And at the same time, I hope that the IAEA will be able to have access to the plant and to exercise its mandate competencies.
The timing of this warning is striking. It came on Saturday, the 6th of August, also remembered as Hiroshima Day. 77 years ago on this day, the world's first atomic bomb was fired in Japan's Hiroshima. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the US detonated an atom bomb over the city of Hiroshima. The force of the explosion was equal to 15,000 tons of TNT, trinitrotoluene. It's a powerful explosive substance. It razed 90% of the city's houses to the ground and caused an estimated 140,000 deaths by the end of 1945. 140,000 people dead. 3 days later, on the 9th of August, the US detonated another bomb. This time in Nagasaki, the explosion took ground temperatures to 4,000 degrees Celsius. As radioactive rain poured from the sky above, Nagasaki was leveled in a matter of seconds. Almost 74,000 people lost their lives by the end of 1945, and it did not end there. Those who survived the bombings fell victim to the radiation it released, terrible side effects like cancer, malnourishment, birth defects, some of which last to this day. It's been over 7 decades. The risk of another nuclear tragedy has never looked this real. The conflict at Ukraine's nuclear plants tells you how we're just one mistake, one miscalculation away from a nuclear Armageddon. I want to wrap this story with some images capturing the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, hoping that these sites will jolt the world into preventing a repeat. Here's the thing about nuclear attacks. They're 100% avoidable. It was avoidable in the 1940s. It is avoidable today. No threat can possibly justify the pain of nuclear destruction. None. But try telling that to China or Russia or any of the so-called world powers. They prefer provocations over peace. Take China's role in Sri Lanka, for example. Their debt trap has already pushed the country over the edge, but Beijing is not done yet. They're intent on creating more trouble for the island. We told you about this last week. A Chinese military vessel was scheduled to arrive in Sri Lanka. It is called Yuan Wong 5. Officially, the Chinese government calls it a research ship. But in reality, it is a spy vessel. The Yuan Wong is used to track satellites and missiles. Its total range is almost 750 kilometers. And where was it going to dock? In the port of Hambantota, less than 160 kilometers from India. So naturally, India opposed it. Officials in Colombo registered a protest with Sri Lanka's foreign ministry. Turns out the pressure worked. Sri Lanka has asked China to defer the voyage. The foreign ministry dispatched a note to the Chinese embassy in Colombo. Let me tell you what it says. The ministry wishes to request that the arrival date of the vessel Yuan Wong 5 in Hambantota be deferred until further consultations are made on this matter. Now, this is a clear U-turn, another first one by Sri Lanka. First, the defense ministry denied the voyage. They claimed no Chinese ship was visiting Hambantota. Then they announced the voyage officially, calling it a refueling stop. And now they have deferred it officially. It makes you wonder what exactly is going on. Why has Sri Lanka made this U-turn? We can think of 2 reasons. Number one, the pressure from India. The Yuan Wong could have spied on the entire southern coast. Indian officials were preparing a robust response. The Navy was on alert. The police presence along the coast was beefed up. So clearly it was a sensitive issue for India. And right now Sri Lanka does not want to lose India's support. Whether it's humanitarian aid, whether it's IMF bailout talks, only India has stepped up to help Sri Lanka. China has largely played spoilsport. So far, India's assistance has topped $4 billion. Clearly, that money has bought some clout. Reason number 2 is the domestic backlash. Sri Lanka's top monk has spoken out against the proposed voyage. Listen to what he said. At the present time, when Sri Lanka is looking up to India, the Western world nations and international monetary institutions, the arrival of the ship is likely to destabilize the ongoing efforts, thus making Sri Lanka's situation still worse. He's got a point. And more importantly, he's got a lot of followers. Buddhist monks are a powerful group in Sri Lanka. They played a huge role in bringing down the Rajapaksas, also getting them elected in the first place. But it's not just the monks. The opposition parties are also opposing China. The Tamil National Alliance criticized the voyage. So did parliamentarian Harsh De Silva. He belongs to Sajith Premadasa's political party. So put together, the voyage had no supporters. It would anger the Sri Lankan public. It would also antagonize India. So this weekend, Colombo decided to defer it. How did China take the news? Their foreign ministry says it has noted these reports, but they neither confirmed nor denied it. Instead, they attacked India. This is the statement from the Chinese government. We urge relevant parties to see China's scientific exploration in a reasonable and sensible way and stop disturbing normal exchanges and cooperation between China and Sri Lanka. That's a message for India. China is accusing India of disturbing its relations with Sri Lanka. Reports say their embassy wanted an urgent meeting with Ranil Wickremesinghe. Did the president agree? Again, there's no clarity. Some reports do claim that Wickremesinghe held a closed-door meeting, but so far there is no official confirmation. It's hard to say how this controversy will play out. Certainly a tough balancing act for Sri Lanka. On one side, you have China, your largest creditor, also your biggest investment and trading partner. On the other side, you have India, a much safer bet in the long run. Now, this round has clearly gone to the Indian side. A deferment is sort of like a strategic win for India. But knowing China, this is not the end. The proxy war in Sri Lanka is just getting started. From Sri Lanka, we turn to Bangladesh, another Indian neighbor in financial turmoil. The situation there is quite similar to Sri Lanka's. The currency is falling, foreign reserves are depleting, the trade deficit is widening, inflation is skyrocketing. These economic woes have forced the Sheikh Hasina government to take a drastic step. Over the weekend, they hiked the prices of diesel and petrol, the biggest hike since Bangladesh's independence. What followed were protests. Here's a report.
These images are from Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. What you see is not a political rally, it's a protest over fuel price hike. Last week, the Sheikh Hasina government raised fuel prices by a record margin. The price of petrol was hiked by 51%, the price of diesel by 42%. This is by far the biggest price hike since Bangladesh got independence. What triggered it? The global rise in oil prices. It has destabilized Bangladesh's energy market. The state-run Bangladesh Petroleum Corporation alone has incurred losses of $85 million in the last 6 months. To make up for the losses, the government has hiked fuel prices, and while it claims there's no crisis, the indicators and recent developments look worrying. Number 1. Depleting forex reserves. In 2021, they stood at $45.5 billion. In July this year, they fell to $39.6 billion. Reports say this money is sufficient for only 5 months of imports. Reason number 2, a failing currency. The Bangladeshi taka is depreciating. It has lost more than 10% of its value since last year. On August 1st, it fell to a record low of 94.7 against the dollar. The falling currency has led to inflation. In June, the rate of inflation hit an 8-year high of 7.56%. Reason number 4, dwindling foreign direct investment. FDI flows to Bangladesh have declined 18.6% since last year. Why? Because of the widening trade deficit. That's reason number 5. Bangladesh's trade deficit has widened to $27.2 billion. Imports are surging. Exports have fallen abysmally. What is Bangladesh doing to overcome these challenges? It's seeking funds, like Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Last week, the country applied for an IMF bailout. It sought a $4.5 billion rescue package. Dhaka has also reached out to the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Talks are still underway. In the meantime, it seems that Bangladesh has also turned to China. On Monday afternoon, the country's prime minister hosted the Chinese foreign minister. They discussed development, cooperation, and investments. There was no word on financial aid. If Dhaka is tracking the news in the neighborhood, it will be wary of Chinese money.
What's common among Pakistan, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh? They've all been targets of China's trap. Guess who else is caught in it? Apple, the American tech giant. It is afraid of angering Beijing. Apple has been watching the situation near Taiwan and it is worried about incurring the wrath of the dragon. So it sent a message to its suppliers in Taipei: scratch made in Taiwan, henceforth mark all goods as Chinese. Which basically means that Apple suppliers have been told to label their goods as made in Taiwan, China, or made in Chinese Taipei. The implication is obvious. Apple is towing Beijing's line. It is calling Taiwan a Chinese territory. But why is Apple so desperate to please Beijing? Because business. Apple does not want its supplies to stop. It manufactures its products in China but sources parts and components from Taiwan. They're imported from Taiwan into China. Now, China has a long-standing rule for such imports. Any Taiwanese import must say that Taiwan is a part of China. Now, this rule has not been strictly enforced so far. But with the way things are going, Apple clearly does not want to take a chance. The company was worried about Chinese customs officials. They did not want their imports to be held up, so Apple asked the suppliers to fix the labels. And it asked them to do it quickly. Reports say Apple wanted them to deal with this matter, quote-unquote, urgently. Remember, this is an important time for Apple. It's about to launch new products in autumn. There are reports that a new iPhone could hit the market, so Apple wants to keep China in the good books. And this is not a first. In the past, too, Apple has bent over backwards for the Communist Party. It has made significant compromises. Around 3 years ago, it dropped the flag emoji of Taiwan. Those using an Apple device in Hong Kong or Macau did not have the icon on their virtual keyboards. The move had angered activists in Hong Kong. Apple did this during the massive pro-democracy protests in the region. China had just begun its crackdown on Hong Kong, and Apple clearly showed which side it's on. Then it indulged in censorship. In 2019, Apple dropped several singers from Hong Kong. What for? For supporting the pro-democracy campaign. One of them had released a song that angered Beijing. Its lyrics referred to the violence during the 1989 Tiananmen Square protest. So Apple removed the song and censored the singers. And this is the same company, by the way, that takes pride in standing up for user privacy around the world. That's their USP. But in China, they bowed before the state censors. In 2017, Apple took down multiple apps from its Chinese App Store. What did these apps do? They helped Chinese citizens beat the Great Wall of censorship. They helped in evading the country's internet filters. So Apple took down VPN providers. These were services that helped users get uncensored internet in China. And it's not like Apple has not been questioned for such decisions. US lawmakers have repeatedly called out the tech giant. Last year, 4 members of the US Congress wrote a letter. It was addressed to Apple CEO Tim Cook. Allow me to read to you a part of that letter. Apple users in China have zero protections against the Chinese government's use of their data stored by the company. And instead of working to counter this problematic reality, Apple continues to concede to the Chinese government's demands. We urge you to consider Apple's position as a pawn in China's malfeasance and take the necessary actions to separate your company from the Chinese government's abuses of its international people. A pawn in China's malfeasance. That's what lawmakers in the US called Apple. What was the company's response? Apple said it has never made any compromises. Well, to Apple we say its actions speak louder than its words. Our next story is from Australia. The country's flag carrier is in a fix. Qantas Airways. It is facing a serious staff shortage, so much so that they've asked their executives to serve as baggage handlers to sort and scan baggage and luggage at airports. And the move is quite telling. It underscores the depth of the crisis the aviation industry is facing, not just in Australia, but all over the world. Just this weekend, more than 900 flights had to be cancelled in the US. More than 7,000 were running late. Same story in Europe. Why are airlines the world over in hot water? Our next report tells you.
The aviation industry is in a fix. Since summer began, most airlines around the world have either faced a staff shortage or frequent walkouts by their employees. The latest to get hit is Qantas, the flag carrier of Australia. It's running low on ground handlers, the ones who sort and scan bags at airports. Most of them were laid off in the lockdown. The jobs were then outsourced to contractors. An Australian court has now ruled the decision as unlawful. The airline is in disarray. New hirings could take months, and reports of lost baggage are mounting. So what does Qantas do? It turns to its executives to fill in. A leaked memo from the airline reveals that senior executives at Qantas have been asked to trade their high-profile positions for ground handling. Here's what the memo states. 100 managers are needed for frontline airport roles. People who volunteer will be posted at Sydney and Melbourne airports. The volunteers will then work as ground handlers for at least 3 months. The desperate move shows the depth of labour shortage the airline is facing. In June, it had to cancel over 8% of scheduled flights, most of them due to staff shortage. Interestingly, the cancellations are not limited to Qantas. Thousands of miles away in the United States, many airlines are facing a similar challenge. On Sunday itself, over 950 American flights had to be cancelled, and over 7,700 flights were running late. The reason? A chronic staff shortage, pilots unwilling to extend duty hours, and issues like lack of maintenance. Same story in Europe. A new report says that in August alone, over 15,000 flights in Europe were cancelled. The reasons were the same: staff shortages and strikes. These developments beg the question: what will it take to get the aviation industry out of this mess? Experts say there is no easy fix. They say recovery will be a long haul, mostly because the jobs lying vacant are not easy. They will require months of training to be filled. And whenever they are, there could be another batch of workers stretched to the breaking point.
We're wrapping with that, leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.
Jeigu mes turėjom ten, bet perkelį, čia esu palapinė.